Who Jumbo Espresso Talk Today community. It's Robin here. So glad that you came through to join us today for another uncommon conversation with Professor William Smith about racial battle fatigue. As I said last week in the introduction, Professor Smith brings an expansive, a truly expansive range of knowledge and experience to the show. And we are continuing to tap into that knowledge and experience. We have a great resource here, so we're going to get as much information and insight as we can in our short time together. And yes, of course, we are very grateful for this opportunity and for Professor Smith's generosity with his time. Last week's discussion introduced us to racial battle fatigue from the actual man, the actual scholar who coined the actual term racial battle fatigue. But he took us even beyond that. He discussed living in an anti Black environment. He discussed the effects of microaggressions on Black health. We even discussed genocide and how Black people can make a very strong argument that there is and has been a genocide occurring against the Black people. Yes, we went there. And it was an eye opening and mind expanding show. You might remember him saying last week, and I quote, "This country was founded on anti Black laws. It was founded on the enslavement of African people who had been brilliant scholars and pharmacists and agriculturalists in their own country. Stupid people did not develop this country." End quote. See what he means? People don't know about the brilliant Black people that developed the United States or about the great civilizations from which they were taken. Then Professor Smith went on to say, "There is no corner of the earth that you can go that does not have an anti-Black script, that does not have anti-Black laws or a history of anti-Black laws." I mean, wow. That's powerful, and it's just really so important to understand. So I really encourage you to listen to that podcast if you haven't already, or listen to it again if you like. It's your choice. It's all good here. And we have a lot more from Professor Smith today, and we're beginning with Black rage. Black rage is a fact, and it's a real feeling experienced by many Black people living with the daily indignity of systemic racism. Professor Smith will discuss that, but he'll also discuss the role of culture and community in dealing with the stress and the rage of racism. Professor Smith touched on the issue of rage at the end of the previous show in response to Ben's question, so that's where we're going to start today. But Ben and Mel are not here just yet. They're going to arrive in a minute, and then we'll get started. While we wait, let me remind you a little bit about Professor Smith's background. William A. Smith is a full professor and department chair in the Department of Education, Culture, and Society at the University of Utah. He also holds a joint appointment in the Ethnic Studies Program, African American Studies Division, as a full professor. Dr. Smith is the co-editor of the book, The Racial Crisis in American Higher Education. His research focuses primarily on racial battle fatigue, and his work has appeared in a lot of different places and prestigious journals and all over the place. And now he's appearing again with the Espresso Talk Today team. Well, Ben and Mel have arrived. Let's turn to today's uncommon conversation with Professor William Smith, already in progress.
So, racial battle fatigue is the psychological race-related stress, the biological race-related stress, the emotional, behavioral, race-related stress, and the stress within the society. So, all that collectively adds up to racial battle fatigue.
Yeah,
And you've heard the term black rage and all this other
yeah,
stuff before,
yeah.
right? Do you know who David Allen Greer is?
Not familiar.
I figured you might not, but
Oh, I
you,
don't.
you know him if I put a picture up of him. You remember in Living Color,
Oh, yeah.
right? And he was one of those actors in A Living Color,
Mm.
and he you remember he was like when one character was Wanda, and he played Wanda's friend sometimes. But anyway,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
for those people, I bring up David Allen Greer for a different reason. Do you know who his father was?
No.
Because he comes from a very educated family, David Allen Greer, and he was a classically trained actor. His father was a psychiatrist. His father is one of the people who wrote the book Black Rage.
Ah, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
William
didn't know
H.
that.
Here we
Greer.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So
have that book here.
that's his father, right?
Okay.
But his father and also Dr. Um, Price Cobb, they kind of took it from more of the discussion in that book from Eurocentric explanations of psychiatry and mental disorders and things like that,
Mhm.
or mental health. And so you could tweak that a little bit more from more of a African centered spot. Once you do that, what you really do is you start to understand, well, why is it that we have black rage? I argue that there's something that I call Afropenia. Afropenia.
Opinion.
And Afropenia is basically a micro level and macro level psychological assault on the black community that causes a distancing from their Africanity,
Mhm.
African Americanness, and cultural identity that produces an anti self, alien self, self destructive, and organic disorders. All right? And
Yeah.
so that last part of disorders I borrow from Naeem Akbar. He
Mm-hmm.
has a piece called The Mental Health of Blacks, where he lays out the the alien self, the anti-self, the self-destructive, and the organic disorders. And we really need to revisit that because I think it's still critical work. But understanding Afropenia, which means a loss of your Africanity,
Yeah.
right? So to be grounded in African culture, because you know what does culture really do for us?
Hmm.
Culture gives us guidance, discipline, order, and strategies, and it
Mm.
reminds us of it keeps reminding us of location, where is our center. It puts us in order. So a disorder is something that takes you out of your orderly disposition,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
every attack on our psychology, every aspect of Afropenia is an attempt to move us out of order. And so what you see going on here in the United States now is is kind of a strategic attack of and perpetuation of this genocide on blacks. So much so that everything that we consume is poisonous. And what I mean by that, what we see on TV, what we see on music videos, what we see displayed on commercials. When you just look at the black people in movies, when you look at the black um, actors or people through an African-centered lens, a lens of genocide, and a lens of racial battle fatigue, you start to understand why are we having the problems we're having in our society, because people are imposing things on us where we're thinking that they're giving us a healthy option to do things and to be expressive. Like they'll say, well, we got this. what's that new chicken thing from the
Chick-fil-A.
Colonel? The
Oh,
Colonel.
KFC.
Yeah, KFC. They got a new chicken thing. It's Beyond Chicken,
Hmm.
right? So
Oh,
Yeah.
you think you go in there and you think you eating a healthy option, and you find out what that's made out of, and you
Jesus.
still get sick. They trick us, right? And they give us all this stuff, and they give us arguments, and especially in college, where the only groups that turn on each other in college is black women and black men,
mm, mm,
right? Because they give us misinformation, no facts, no data, and then any conclusion that you draw that does not have white supremacy and racism as part of the factor is a erroneous conclusion.
mm.
So the reason why they don't want CRT in the schools,
Yes, I was
Yeah.
about to ask.
which there is no CRT in the schools, we know that um, most of the schools are headed by white women. Most all of them went through teacher ed, and I'm in the College of Education. I have an appointment in the College of Education. They do not teach CRT in the College of Education. Matter of fact, if a white person, a white parent, child is learning CRT, they should be happy because more than likely that child is in law school. That's going to be the
Right.
first place
Oh
that
man.
they,
Yeah.
they will get some
Yeah.
CRT. And so, what
And
CRT, I'll get right with you, attorney.
mhm.
What CRT really is that they're afraid of is to ask questions like I just did. Not to say, well, what's wrong with him? What has been done that causes that behavior in him?
Hmm.
So it's a different lens. The first one sees him as problematic and dysfunctional. The second one is asking questions, what caused that problem? Because he wasn't born that. He was born in order. So what led to the disorder? That's the level of consciousness that they don't want us to have. I'm sorry, Attorney Bradley.
No, no, I just wanted you to explain to the listeners what CRT means, and for that matter,
Okay.
a brief definition, because not everyone's familiar with that concept.
Yeah, good point, Diane. Yeah.
CRT was founded, well, the founder that is considered to be the one who started CRT was Derek Bell
Mm,
in law school.
mm,
Derek Bell used to be a Harvard law professor, and it started in critical legal studies. And then from critical legal studies, it became critical race studies or critical race theory. Primarily black and brown people were behind the scholarship of that. And then it moved into education and other places as far as professors writing from that perspective.
Mm.
But it hasn't been taught in any schools K through 12. There is no curriculum. Most people who take teachers ed are required to take one or two diversity courses, and they don't do that well in those. So how can they get through a CRT class?
Yeah.
So it's a graduate level, primarily a course or two taught in law school
Law school.
Interesting.
and prestigious law schools at that.
mhm.
Mm,
Thank
mhm.
you for clarifying
I
that.
also have another question about the order and disorder you were describing with regards to culture. So let's, as a mixed person, then I'm curious what your perspective would be on this. Uh, to how would one combine the African heritage with the other white culture? How would those two things combine? Because I imagine the individual would have to develop their own sense of culture or find their own symbols which give meaning to their world. But what do you think of that?
It's a little harder to develop it. It's much better to embrace it. So
Okay.
there's going to be culture is a magnet, and no matter where you move, it pulls you back to it,
Hmm.
right? So whatever you're pulled to more closely, whatever makes your heart really beat, and makes you just feel good,
Mm.
that's the culture that's calling mostly for you, right?
Okay.
Now you have to remember, um, whiteness and white people is not a culture, right? It's whiteness is really a concept, and um, it has material meaning. So the more you buy, remember this: the Irish gave up a large part of their culture to become white,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so by giving that culture up to become white means that you benefit from whiteness now. But if you stay outside of whiteness, you might be closer to whiteness than, say, black people and Mexican people, people like that. But you have to give up something. So many of them changed their last name, you know. So it sounded less Irish and more American, quote, air quotes there. And so by doing that, they've taken on something else.
Yeah.
And for a person who is biracial, white and black, if you're drawn to whiteness, that's just a concept. If you're drawn to some culture, Italian
Yeah.
or Greek or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that, that's different.
Okay.
So you can embrace that part of your identity, but you might get more nourishment from, say, your Africanity, right?
Okay. Thanks. That's a real good way of describing it. Yeah.
And remember, like even my example with the Irish owned slaves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
My family in Mississippi, uh, the the um, the enslaver there came straight out of Ireland to the East Coast. What their family were already rich, and then got into the slave industry and moved from I think it was North Carolina to Mississippi before Mississippi became a state. But their wealth was their U.S. wealth came out of enslavement.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oh, sorry, you were gonna ask.
No, you have a follow up on that because I'm going to switch topics a little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was also gonna switch. So
Yeah. Okay. I'll switch first.
okay. All right.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry because I was looking at this from the great, iconic Chester Pierce. Um, and he says here the chief vehicle for pro racist behaviors are microaggressions. And can you expand on that some? I like to, I mean, I know what a microaggression is. I think I feel it several times a week. Yeah, but can you compare it to macro and microaggressions, please?
Yeah. And so Dr. Pierce, who was my mentor and helped me think a lot through these things, was just a brilliant man, a Harvard professor, had a joint appointment in the School of Medicine as a psychiatrist and also in the College of Education. He actually came to this from a lab, I think it was in the Antarctic, that they were doing studies on these aggressions to the human body from an environment, a cold environment that puts you in a different mental and physical state, right? So his mind was already thinking about climate, exposure, and what it does. He flew back to the U.S., had a layover in Michigan, and I believe it was Michigan. And he said, that's the first place that I ever wanted to kill a white man because of the encounter that he had. And that just, and Dr. Pierce, I'm 6'3", Dr. Pierce was about 6'4", and slender man. And so that was just on his mind as he went back to Boston. And so he started to make a parallel association between the environment and stress that black people live in, and that how we're often hit with these things in an unsuspected way that our body and mind has always have to if we're not on guard, which takes a lot of stress. Then if we're not on guard, we can be vulnerable. So it's like my example of not having the mask on during COVID and no vaccination or nothing like that. So that's where he came with the microaggressions from a research lab, meaning stress, because stress is a old term that comes out of like engineering and the sciences. He said it's a microaggression, but it was microaggressions are what he called being part of an offensive mechanism. And so people tend to skip over the offensive mechanism which microaggressions come out of. I call it today offensive racist mechanisms. All right. So racial microaggressions come out of that. And those are the daily slights. And he talked primarily of the subtle, but they also can be um, very overt and across the continuum. So I call many of these offensive racist mechanisms racial micro level and racial macro level aggressions. And within those micro level aggressions, you have racial micro aggressions, which could go from the subtle to the overt, right? And it's the micro in microaggressions should not be seen as many, like MINI, insignificant, little, tiny, irrelevant. That's not what it be. People get caught up on microaggressions, and then you ask them, well, what is microsociology? What is microeconomics? You know, what is microcosm? And can you apply that same? Why should we throw away microsociology? Why do you seem to understand it in that reference point, and then you want to attack what he's arguing? So it's not about something that's insignificant or tiny.
Mm-mm. No.
It's very important, and it's some people call it like the depth of a thousand cuts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a minor, I guess, one way of thinking about it is a minor accumulation over a long amount of time. And those things can make a big dent in
Right,
someone's psyche.
right, because it's easy to just get shot and die,
Yeah.
but torture is a different set of pain.
Yeah, and Dr. Smith, how do you counter the argument, or for that matter, the comments from others who may not understand the depth of how these microaggressions may have an impact on a person's physical and mental health? For example, many times you'll hear whites as well as others who may say, and even some blacks, "Oh, you're just, you know, making a mountain out of a molehill," or "you're being too sensitive," or "get over it," because we're in a post-civil rights era, and I wasn't involved in enslaving you and or your ancestors. Why can't you move forward? How do
Right.
how do you respond to that?
Well, I laugh at the first, and then I say, let's look at the data. I don't tend to be a person who likes, even though my background is in counseling, social psychology. I don't tend to stick with just feelings. Feelings is all right to have, and they should be affirmed. But let's look at data to back up your point, right? So I would ask, this is how you can really get them. Would you say that to the Jews?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, not, oh, wait, are you trying to? No, I didn't say anything. I'm just looking at another group. Now we know that the Jewish Holocaust, and they saw tremendous damage, psychological and physiological damage
Absolutely.
of the victims of the Holocaust. But then, here's the science, and this is not feelings; it's science. Why is it today that, and you've had epidemiologists on the program.
Yeah.
Why is it today that the grandchildren of the Holocaust victims
Yeah.
are more attuned and sensitive to traumatic events that can lead them to depression in
Yes.
greater numbers than those people who weren't descendants of an event like the Holocaust,
Hmm.
just over a short period of time. Similarly, the Cambodians,
Mm.
right? When you look at that period of time with the Maoists, their children or grandchildren are also much more sensitive to issues of trauma, and that might lead them to depression.
This is where we're going to stop for today. But this uncommon conversation, as you know, is definitely far from over. That was a short but intense conversation. Many thanks, Asante Sana, to Professor Smith for discussing the real issue of Black rage. I won't call Black rage a problem. The real problem is systemic racism, white supremacy, and anti Blackness. I think that Black rage is a normal response to living with and experiencing daily aggressions and indignities as a Black person. Who would not be angry about being disrespected? Who would not be angry about having yours and your family's humanity denied? Who would not be angry about experiencing aggressions or the threat of aggressions at every turn? Okay, you might disagree with me here, but rage seems like a normal response for anyone going through what we go through. Now, that doesn't mean we have to act on it, but not outwardly, but maybe we're acting on it inwardly. As the brilliant James Baldwin said in 1961, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all the time. Well, this hasn't really changed. These are not just beautiful words, though, but they are words that describe a real and authentic feeling experienced by millions of Black people and other people of color in America and around the world. But let's also remember that Professor Smith not only identified the problem, but he also gave us solutions. Of course, besides dismantling systemic racism. He also discussed the importance of culture and community in helping us find our center, helping us to rebalance ourselves. He noted the toxic environment in which Black people live and the toxins that are forced on us. And he also said that being grounded in our culture helps us to rebalance and find our center, which is where our peace and power are located. Culture and community. We've heard these words from other experts that have appeared with the Espresso Talk Today team. They are important, and everyone must find and define their own community and culture. But I do want to point out that culture and community are powerful, and that's why they've been kept from us. Professor Smith also discussed this too. Remember, during slavery, laws were passed that made it illegal for enslaved people to practice their religion, to speak their native languages, or to express their native culture in any other way. Enslaved people could not gather together in groups of more than three or four. Enslaved people could not talk together without a white person present. Of course, those anti Black laws are gone now, but I wonder how much the feeling is gone. There are other ways that Black people are denied culture and community, though these ways appear to be colorblind. I was just reading that HBCUs, the historically Black colleges and universities, are under threat. They are experiencing violence. Their resources are being withdrawn. Their accreditations are being taken away. Yet HBCUs, while only accounting for 3% of all universities, account for 20% of all Black graduates. HBCUs are one place where culture and community come together, and they're being threatened. Raul Andrews, remember he was on the show a little while ago, as executive director of the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, and other guests too, have attested to the continued importance and the relevance of Black colleges and universities. Black communities are also under threat through gentrification, charter schooling, redistricting, and tax burdens. Okay, I'm going to stop here because you know that there's much more to say, but we have to move on. But the take from today, Black rage about racism is real and it's normal. Returning to and supporting our Black culture is a way to recenter ourselves and regain our power and to move away from rage. Returning to and supporting our Black community is a way to recenter ourselves and regain our power and to move away from rage. Both are under threat of extinction. Is that too strong of a word? Possibly. Just let me know. We can talk about these things. Well, that's all for today. Professor Smith will return to discuss more about racial battle fatigue and this time about Black health, as well as the stress of racism. The internal struggles of racism, or intra-racial battle fatigue, is also a thing and has serious consequences. We gotta face the truth that sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. Again, I won't get ahead of the discussion. Let's save some for next time. At Espresso Talk today, we are a vibrant community of amiable intellectuals who are passionate about discussing the Black experience. Community and culture are very important to us, and that's why we're so happy and so grateful that Professor Smith joined us today to discuss these important concepts. We hope that you enjoyed today's show, and we hope that you'll return to hear more of the discussion with Professor Smith as he discusses the effects of racial battle fatigue on Black health. Very important discussion. You don't want to miss this. Thanks again for coming through today, community. Soul, strength, and reparations. Asante Sana. Bye for now.